before his retirement, Pope Benedict had drawn up a document with a proposed model for reunion between East and West. It is probable that had that gone out and been diffused and accepted by the East, it would have meant that we would have adopted their date for Easter. It is interesting that Vasula Raiden and also Myrna in Damascus have indicated that the authentic date would be the unchanged one of the East. We remember that we changed things with the Gregorian calendar, whereas they kept the unchanged Julian one. We were trying to catch up on lost time with regard to things going out of sync, and so astronomically, technically it was correct what we did, but then we lost unity. And we know that the Lord does want this healed. It appears that if it is, then from that apparently small beginning of the reunification around the one date of Easter, other things will then follow also. It is also interesting that Our Blessed Lady at Fatima was insisting on consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart, and that there was a promise that it would be eventually converted as a result, and that would mean, we think, that keeping their own right, obviously, they would recognize the primacy of Peter, and given the openness of mind of Rome, it would probably then adjust itself with regard to its right in connection with the date itself, but it would have precisely that situation of the whole Church breathing again with its two lungs. It is not indifferent, therefore, that in the East at this moment they are waiting for what is always there, same time, same channel, on their Holy Saturday, the ignition from on high. It's always been testified to. Amongst many, I just pick up this one casually, by the German equivalent of a kind of Marco Polo, who actually was a great historian and a great traveller, Johann Schildberger. He was writing around 1425, and we have this interesting testimony of what he found. He visited Jerusalem twice. In the 40th chapter of his work, he describes the Holy Sepulchre and makes reference to the miracle of the Holy Fire, which is about to take place now in the Holy Sepulchre. Below, we have precisely his very words, so it's worth quoting in extenso. The church in which is the Holy Sepulchre is a fine church, high and circular. It is covered all over with lead and is outside the city. In the middle of the church, in the chapel on the right hand, is the Holy Sepulchre. There is a lamp that burns all the year until Good Friday. Then it goes out and relights itself on Easter Day. There is also an Eastern Eve. Now, this is interesting because it's what he's witnessing at the time. He's talking about the vigil of Easter itself, that's Holy Saturday night. So this is what he has to say and what he witnesses. There is also on, this is the Old English here, on Eastern Eve, a brightness above the Holy Sepulchre that is like fire. Many people come there from Armenia, from Syria, and from the country of, now, Prester Johann of Ethiopia, Priest John. So, to see this brightness in the church. So he's describing what he's seeing and what has always been seen in some shape or form since before the initial complex was completed under the Emperor Constantine the Great, testified to by the Eastern, universal saint, because the church was divided only much later, Gregory the Illuminator. There it came, and has come ever since, and we have the fact that it was known by all and was a problem for some. What actually happened was that a particularly fanatic, very young and therefore irresponsible caliph reacted so strongly that it eventually became an initial cause of the Crusades. It seems that this young ruler, who had risen already to the throne at the age of 11, was brainwashed by tutors. His tutor, Bariawan, acted as regent. At the age of 15, this Caliph al-Hakim put his teacher to death and took over. His religious fanaticism quickly led him to acts of insanity, through which he acted with abnormal cruelty. The Syrian historian and poet Ibn al-Kalanizi, who's writing around 1130, in his work History of Damascus, explains the reason that led al-Hakim to the destruction of the church in Jerusalem. He mentioned that every year, during the period of Easter, thousands of Christians of Egypt formed large caravans with camels and travelled from Cairo to Jerusalem to attend the Holy Fire ceremony. The miracle's fame had spread to the entire Muslim world and acted as a magnet that attracted thousands of Christians, but many Muslims as well. There was only one way to stop it all. It was to destroy all traces of the church. So this same historian, al-Kalanizi, writes that in the year 398, that's their calendar, and it corresponds to our 1007, 1008, so 1007, 1008, that period, he ordered the destruction of the church of, now it's called Al-Kumana in Jerusalem. Now the root of kum in Hebrew, and therefore also in Arabic, because they're both Semitic languages, is that of rising. So here we are, Al-Kumana, the one attached to the rising, anastasis in Greek. So obviously that's how it was referred to here. It was to be destroyed. And the same historian is writing this period, it was the current custom of the Christians of Egypt to go every year to Jerusalem in great camel litters to celebrate Easter there in the church of the Kumana, the rising. We have the root, by the way, in the Gospels. Talitha Kumi, little girl, I say to you to get up, to rise. It's the root of resurrection. So on it goes, and it was pretty devastating. Prior to the destruction, the Christians of Egypt learned of the Caliph's plans and notified the Patriarch of Jerusalem, who was able to remove all sacred relics from the church. So the historian Al-Kalanizi states that the destructive craze was so great that the building was destroyed stone by stone. The Arab chronicler Yahya ibn Sa'id makes mention of the huge destruction suffered at the Holy Sepulchre. Ibn Abi Zahir tried to destroy the Holy Tomb and to wipe out every trace of it, and so he smashed most of it and had it removed. So they did not stop at the destruction of the tomb, Idicule, that's the actual central part of it, but even destroyed the piece of the rock that was the tomb's original roof. So it's destroying the very appearance of a tomb at all by that very fact. The great ascetic, Saint Lazarus Galesiotes, he lived from 966 to 1053, was an ascetic at the monastery of San Sabas. It's a very old monastery, still operative. And he was an eyewitness to the events. And he confirms that the destruction of the church was complete, since the Muslims found gold coins and jewellery inside the church walls, which had been placed there as offerings in the era of St. Helena, the mother of Constantine. She was the one who actually found the true cross. And therefore, the place was important from that time onwards. I mean, they knew that that was the actual spot. So the persecution quickly spread to the greater area. Al-Hakim had all the crosses in the churches destroyed, and the use of wine in the preparation of the Holy Eucharist was forbidden. Yahya ibn Sa'id also mentions that Al-Hakim even desecrated the Christian cemeteries in Cairo, where he had the bones of the dead scattered. The same author explains that this specific persecution was the cause of the mass migrations of Christians from Palestine and Egypt to Byzantine dominions, primarily to Antioch. So, other Islamic historians have confirmed this. It's quite clear that the destruction was pretty total. Bar Hebreus, but actually that sounds like a Jewish author, he's writing in 1226, he died in 1286, so somewhere between those two dates, and he has a chronography, it's called, and he says that at this time Hakim, the Caliph of Egypt, commanded, and the temple of the resurrection, which is in Jerusalem, was dug up from its roots, that is, from its foundations, and all its furniture was looted, and he laid waste also thousands of churches which were in his dominions. The persecution began through a certain man who hated the Christians. He told Hakim, the Caliph, a story to the effect that the Christians had this hoax, and on it goes. The question is, what happened afterwards when there was no church? Stones here and there, charred, no roof. Was it all stopped? Well, we have a double testimony. First of all, that of the Bishop of Orleans, and also that of the holy monk Richard. The latter was witness of what happened. Heathens who were scattered around the temporary walls of the church on the same week before Easter threw stones at the people who performed the holy services. One stone, as it was thrown, happened to fall inside the tomb and was received by a man of the Lord as a gift, a great gift for himself. So he describes the complete ruin around. But he does indicate that the light came. Strangely enough, the Christians there were threatened with worse if it didn't happen. That's rather ironic. And then we have the interesting detail of how it manifested itself. The day of Holy Saturday arrived when the fire from the Lord was expected, and while the Christians were confined inside waiting to receive the fire through the goodwill of the Lord, armed Gentiles carefully monitored the entire church, so that if the light did not arrive, they would all be put to death by sword. And behold, around the 9th hour, while all were praying, one lamp lit up with the fire of the Lord, without the help of any mortal, and all the heathens were gripped by amazement and awe, and indeed the Christians by joy and exultation, so that all in the church sang together, "Great is our Lord, and of great power. His understanding is infinite." From the Psalms. At once, a blessed man was vested in sacred robes as the liturgy began, and he intoned the Kyrie eleison in a voice that reached the heavens. Now truly readings and psalms and all the others customary rites were brought to completion, as they were in anticipation of the new light which ignited the lamp, and thus chanting with a great voice, "Glory to God in the highest," with tears and shouts from the heart. The blessed man brought joy to the Christians, while to the heathens fear and amazement. So this man was Blessed Richard. He's a French monk. Richard the Blessed he's called. His dates are 970 to 1046. He was the abbot of the monastery of St. Vannes at Lorraine in France from 1004 to 1046. So he's quite reliable, as is this contemporary who is at the same period a witness. So it is going on when there's no roof and the structure is completely destroyed. It's the Bishop of Orléans, and he has interesting detail to add. At the same time, Ulrich, Bishop of Orleans, undertook this journey. It's Rodulfus Glaber who's writing. And he told us about a miracle which should not be passed over. On the day of the great Sabbath, when all the people gathered together to await the holy fire, wondrously lit by the power of God, he was amongst them. Evening was drawing in, when suddenly, just at the time when the fire was to appear, a Saracen, truly an impudent jester, one of the crowd of that race, which every year gathers and mixes with the Christians, cried out in the manner of the Christians when the first fire is first seen, "Arios, Kyrie eleison." Then laughing aloud, mockingly, he reached out and snatched a candle from the hand of one of the Christians and made to flee. But he was seized by a demon who much troubled him. Anyway, he comes to a sticky end. So, I jump this detail and he goes to the essential. At this very moment, as is customary, by the power of God, The fire burst from one of the 7 lamps seen hanging there, and swiftly it ignited the others. The bishop bought this lamp and its oil from Jordan, then Patriarch of Jerusalem, for £1 of gold, and took it back with him to his own see, where he provided many benefits for the sick. So, we see what is going on. What is clear is that it is unchanged, although the way in which it executes itself, adapts itself to the situation, for many centuries it happened outside the édicule, but then at a certain time, from about 1500s or so, I think, it was brought inside, and the Lord adapts himself to that. We have this account, amongst many others, around 1425. And it is the one I started off with, and indicates what is about to take place right now. The interesting thing that is also visible to all is the series of flashes that comes, and he's already aware of it. It's Johann Schildberger's description talking about the flashes. There is this addition, the statement, there is also on Eastern Eve a brightness above the Holy Sepulchre that is like fire. Now this sometimes happens, even now, it depends, it doesn't always have the same pattern. But it has been picked up more than once that before the flashes appear inside, things are happening outside in the skies. A strange luminous effect around the sun, which can be photographed. And then it starts to happen inside, and people can pick it up and see it. Unfortunately, artificial lighting and cameras flashing takes away from the intensity of it, but it is a different light, bluish flashes. And they go in crescendo, in anticipation. The German traveller is describing the well-known fiery flashes that have appeared for centuries at the tomb of Christ, a few hours before the celebration of his resurrection. And it was in order to get a glimpse of these flashes of divine light that thousands of people from different countries flooded into and around the Church of the Resurrection, which still occurs today just as it did then. It is well to pause, because actually here we are handling one of those moments which indicates how close our God is to his creatures. He's bending over from his majestic throne to touch us. And it actually is very quaint. In the moment where this touch ignites the candles of the patriarch, the actual calming down of the dancing fire settles in the form of a column of fire, of light. And he is able then to lift up the 33 candles from this settled column within the édicule, within the interior chamber. That is very similar to the column of fire which led Moses and the Hebrews in the desert. It's the unchanging finger of God. It's the same finger which we find in the Sistine Chapel with that point of ignition, the power of Creator. But it's actually the very same power that we handle at every sacrament, that same bending down of our God to humanity we have in the East and in the West in the apostolic succession. That's why the fullness of the faith is very different from the bits of it which we have only in the reforms coming out of it. They work in the measure in which they come from it. But the Godhead wanted this, but he wants it again in harmony. He only wants one Easter, and this hurts the heart of our God until we fix it. I just conclude, it was fixed briefly in 1439, when the East and the West did have, at an ecumenical council in Florence, an accord which did actually mend it. Remember that at that stage it was easier because it's only in the 1500s that we had the Gregorian calendar. But the primacy of Peter was recognized, and unfortunately what happened in the East is it was not accepted at grassroots level, partly by noisy bishops here and there, but they were known to have had this reaction. In Constantinople, present Istanbul, we would rather be under the Muslims than under Rome. And very soon afterwards, that's exactly what happened. And similar things happened also over the centuries to the patriarchates of the East. Is it a permission of God? We're not quite sure. Certainly, it was not the direct will of God. We know that God is trying hard to get through to his creatures. Easter is the central point of the whole year. We need one fire, one shared moment where earth and heaven are deeply reconciled.